Darien has more than 400 multifamily housing units newly completed, under construction, or in the pipeline, which represents several $100 million of investment. It's over 1,000 units in the past 25 years, more than that a little bit later. But looked at from a 10,000-foot level, it means the town is undergoing one of the most significant transformations in its history ever. And given the magnitude of new development underway, some residents are concerned about how the town's character, how its hometown feel may change. We're fortunate today to have Darien's first selectman and DMA member, Jon Zagrodzky, who you all know, who will discuss these shifts and what it could mean for Darien's day-to-day life and its social fabric, and how the town is working to manage the growth proactively, especially relating to the obvious growth in traffic. Additionally, at the same time, the town may be affected by a new state affordable housing law, which became effective on January 1st, called the House Bill 8002, an act concerning housing growth. I hope Jon will discuss the potential impacts of this new law in context with Darien's broader housing strategy. As David Genovese of the Corbin District told us in January, the goal of many new developments isn't necessarily about changing Darien. It's about reinforcing what already makes Darien special. A key part of this effort is the new Plan of Conservation and Development, which will set Darien's long-term vision for the next decade. The draft is expected to be finalized at the end of April, followed by a public hearing in July and planning and zoning action later that month. Jon was elected first selectman in 2023 and re-elected in 2025. His prior town positions include chairman of the Board of Finance, member of the Town and Police Pension Boards, member of the Public Works Garage, the Ox Ridge School Building Committee, and boards, and president of the Darien Historical Society. Prior to his retirement in December of 2023, Jon served as COO and CFO of Roan Group LLC, which is a middle market private equity firm. Prior to Roan, he was chief administrative officer and chief compliance officer at Oak Hill Capital Management, and before that, he spent 16 years at McKinsey & Company. Jon earned his BA degree in economics and Romance languages from Washington Lee University and an MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. During Q&A, Jon is happy to discuss related topics such as Great Island or the town debt, and assures us that nothing is off limits. So please join me in a warm welcome for Jon Zagrodzky.
So the only topic off limits is how Doug looped me into doing this. That has to be a state secret. So I'm super glad to be here, and I appreciate the invitation. I'm going to divide this discussion into two parts. We're going to talk first about some of the real estate questions that Doug has teed up, and then I want to move on to this notion of social fabric. So why don't we get started on some of this? I'll have a few perspectives if I can pull my slides up. Name spelled right and everything. Of course I had to do it, but that's okay. So if somebody could flip that slide, that'd be great. There you go. So we're going to do this into two parts. I said I want to look at the numbers and give you a perspective on what's really going on with housing and what's getting developed. And then we're going to talk about our social fabric, what makes that special in Darien, and how do we work to preserve and protect that. Next. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because David's already talked about commercial development, but you're right. There's been a transformation of this town. We have a huge number of new retail, new restaurants everywhere. And I'll admit, you're right. It's a little bit shocking to see that. You drive downtown and you see the Corbin District and you think, my God, what's happened to our town? It's almost as shocking as my son calling me up when he got his diploma saying that he had a job. Well, all right, maybe not that shocking, but still it is, when you see those buildings, it really is amazing to contemplate sort of what was there and kind of what we have right now. It kind of reminded me, though, of, next slide, to the construction of the Eiffel Tower. So if anybody has studied this, it's quite interesting. There was a huge protest when Gustave Eiffel decided that he wanted to design this. So there were artists and architects and all the elite of Paris. They all got together and they were furious that this whole thing had been created. And they had this quote that said, We come as lovers of the beauty of Paris, which was until now intact, to protest with all our strength and indignation against the erection of the useless and monstrous Eiffel Tower. Okay, so more than a century later, even a quick pencil sketch of that tower is globally recognized as symbolizing all that makes up France. My point is that today's eyesore with all this construction becomes tomorrow's icon. So the first thing you should get comfortable with is that all these real estate changes are going to become part of the physical fabric of town. And as you see them in action, you'll start to understand that those two can fit in here. And we're lucky to have someone like David Genovese, a longtime resident of this town, with an eye towards what works for Darien, coming in and making those decisions for us. So it's really going to be okay, is my point. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some of the residential development. So if you see from this, and maybe Jeremy's talked about it, but over the last 25 years, it's interesting to see what's happened. Around the turn of the century, Darien was basically just a single family town, a few apartments here and there, but we essentially had nothing. In the last 25 years, we've built more than 1,100 multifamily units, of which just over 300, including everything that's under construction right now, is affordable. And I put out a newsletter on this. If you've not subscribed to my newsletter, I do write them personally. We don't have a functioning press in town, and so I try to keep everybody informed, but please subscribe to that. But one of the things that I make in that, or point out in that newsletter, is that this multifamily housing, it seems transformational, but when you look at what that's created, we've got about now 15% of our stock is multifamily housing. And as I'll get to a little bit later, it really has changed not the character of the town so much, but the availability and flexibility to have different living arrangements. And the people that I've talked to are actually quite happy about that. Doug brought up this House Bill S8002, which was the bill that the governor eventually signed after he vetoed the previous version, and the worries that it's going to force us to create more of this housing. The fact is that the governor has mentioned Darien multiple times as a shining example of how you do this kind of housing. And if you look at what we've created, and in a town that's 98% developed, to add in now 300 affordable housing units in a town like Darien, Darien actually stands out as a town that does it right because of our inclusionary zoning and what we've tried to do to build affordable housing and multifamily housing that integrates with the town, so that when you look at it, even when you look at the heights at Darien, which used to be the old Allen O'Neill up there in Roden Avenue and West, you'd look at that and you'd say, that's affordable housing, but that fits into the character and look of our town. And so it's a testament to everybody who's involved in this that when we are designing something like this, we end up with housing that fits and looks like it belongs in Darien. And that's why taking the governor's approach, which is towns take the lead, something I think is very important. He's specific that he's looking for more transit-oriented development, more affordable housing, but he's going to leave it to the towns to define it in a way that works for them. And in my view, that's what we've done so far. And I welcome the chance to continue to do that in Darien in a smart and measured way, but not do it in a way that complies with someone who doesn't live here in terms of what they want to see. But in my view, this has all been pretty successful. But Jeremy's provided a lot more details on that. So I want to move on a little bit to a couple of questions around traffic and parking. So next slide, please. So it is true that we have a growing concern about traffic. And some of you called me and said, hey, what about all this multifamily development? We think that's adding to traffic. Oh, look how long it takes me to get across town on a Saturday on the post road. 20 minutes, outrageous. Next slide. So one of the things that I did, and I've talked a little bit about this, but I want to make sure you all had an insight into this, is that we subscribe to a service called Placer.ai. And what Placer does, that's a great thing about all this AI, literally every day there's a new thing that you can take advantage of. These guys have aggregated anonymized cell phone location data. So anytime you're out and about, unless you've specifically disabled it, your cell phone transmits your location. It's not Jon Zagrodzky speaking of the DMA location, but that this cell phone is right here, right now. And when they aggregate all that data, they can tell lots of things that in terms of traffic, where people are coming from, there's all kinds of demographic information you get from this. And so we were able to use that data to actually tell where people come from and where and how much of that traffic or sort of cell phone passages we see in Darien. So I got their system, and what I did was I put in 3 virtual pins on the post road, one by the Stanford State Line, one over by the Sports Shop, and one up by Trader Joe's. And I said, measure for me all the cell phone passages or if you will, pings on this over the last 3 years and tell me what you see. Next slide. So what you get is that actually over that 3 year period, the traffic flow in Darien as measured by cell phones going through town, which is a proxy for vehicular traffic, that actually has only increased about 4% over the last 3 years. And what you see is that a big part of that increase seems to be coming from the pin that I've placed on the Stamford line. So let's look at this in a little more detail. Next slide. If you break down that increase in traffic in terms of traffic pings, what you find is that about 50% of it or more is coming from cell phones that live in Stamford. I talked to the police department about why that might be, and they said for all the development that they have on the east side of Stamford, they don't have any grocery stores. And so their speculation is a lot of people are coming here to either Palmer's or Whole Foods to do some of their daily shopping or weekend activities just because they have no options in Stamford. Similarly, another 30% is from New York City-based and other cell phones. What does that mean? That means Waze. That means all these moving maps in your car. The minute there's a blockage on 95, what does it tell you? Take a back road in Darien. We actually get quite a few complaints from residents about that saying, what about all this traffic? There are a few movements nationwide to figure out how to restrict that technology and stop it from guiding cars into neighborhoods with what were previously little used roads. I don't know how far that's going to get. It's really hard to legislate that type of technical thing once that genie's out of the bottle. And it's something that all towns are having to grapple with across the US. Point being, it's not new residents and not new multifamily that's driving traffic in Darien. That traffic problem is coming from outside of Darien. Next slide. So to prove that further, I went to the assessor's office and I asked this question. How many cars were registered in Darien in 2015? 17,600. It's actually about 300 cars less today. There are less cars registered today, 10 years later, than there were in 2015. And because when I ask people, they say, oh, yeah, there's got to be 5,000 more cars. Not true. And so this slide would buttress my point before, which is we have traffic, but the traffic's not being generated by additions of multifamily housing. And in fact, if you talk to David Genovese about the type of people who are living in this housing, he'll tell you that it's grandparents who wanted to stay here and see their grandkids. It's new families that have jobs in New York City. And he says that in his look at the residents in Corbin 1, which is leased up, that's their profile. These people are, in fact, not driving around town. And if they are, maybe they're contributing to a bit of traffic on Saturdays. Bottom line is it's not multifamily housing that's creating this. So next slide. My conclusions on it, though, is we've got some problems. They did an analysis of traffic flows in the United States, and that corridor on 95 from Greenwich up to Westport is the worst traffic in the United States. It beats out 405 in LA, it beats 410 loop in Washington, D.C. It is the worst traffic in the country. And it's $1 trillion in eminent domain costs to solve that. And I'm not sure even that would solve the problem. It's just something we're going to have to live with. But as I said, my judgment is that the pace of Darien's development, particularly with this multifamily housing, is not going to be a key contributing factor to that going forward. And the last point I wanted to make on this, with developers being thoughtful and talking to David Genovese, they're adding a lot of parking, which I'll get to in a minute. But the way they've designed the flows around that parking is you can't access the new parking at the Corbin district from the Post Road. You've got to go down Corbin Drive or the new penny lane that he's created so that you don't have people backing up on the Post Road, either coming into or out of parking there. And that kind of thoughtfulness is something that's going to really prevent the formation of further bottlenecks on heavily traveled roads like the Post Road. So bottom line is we got a lot of really smart people who are on top of traffic. We're never going to be a traffic-free town. We live by 95. It's the Post Road. We're never going to solve that. As I've showed in the past, we had a Post Road traffic study that sits in my office talking about the problem of the Post Road traffic, and it was dated 1952. This has been a problem since God was a boy. So we're not going to change that. But we've got a lot of smart people managing this, so I feel confident. Next slide. Okay. Let's talk a little about commuter parking capacity. Anybody see that the town bought Kip Coons's lot? So that lot, yeah, I applaud that myself. And it's pretty interesting. When his father bought that lot, they had intended it for to be a post office or some retail, and they worked on it for quite a while, and nothing ever came together. And that lot sat as a cash parking lot for 75 years, right? It is about 293, almost 300 parking places, surprising. If we'd lost that lot to a developer, we would have lost 15% of our commuter parking capacity or 25% at the Darien Railroad Station. Can you imagine that? That was money well spent to protect that lot. So I think that we're in good shape. We've got about, you can't see it on here, but we have about 2,000 commuter parking spots across town, in town, and at the two train stations. And I think with keeping the Coons lot in town control as opposed to going to a developer was a good investment on behalf of the town. We do have still as our strategy, and I've got 3 companies that are going to bid on this, but I hope by the end of the year we will eliminate the hanging tags and just go to a plate reader system, and I'm working on that. Further to that, though, for all the parking problems we're having, and I do get a lot of commuter complaints, things are going to be a lot better when Corbin is finished and when the Darien train station is finished, and those should all be largely completed, certainly the station by the fall, and a lot of it for Corbin too by the first of next year. So traffic will get better. Next slide, please. In terms of downtown parking, did you know that Corbin 1 and Corbin 2 combined, did David say that? 900 parking places are being created. He's got an underground garage largely for residents and employees, got a surface lot and a parking garage for retail customers. We are adding a ton of parking to town, and you combine that with keeping the Coons lot. And what I have as my next scheme is to think about creating a downtown parking garage. I think the Coons lot is great for that. We could use that to have retail employees downtown park there instead of in the Center Street lots. That's going to free up 100 spaces just for retail customers in the downtown area. So we've got some things that are working through right now that I think could really improve downtown parking. So more to come on that. Next slide. So let me talk a little bit about social fabric, because people have said, well, I've looked at these buildings and all this construction and all this development. I'm worried about social fabric. And so let's see what our friends at Merriam-Webster's have to say. Social fabric, noun, right? The density of relationships and shared norms that make strangers act like neighbors. I can tell you that when in this job, I mean, I've been in government for now more than 17 years. I thought I really understood this, not until I actually took this job. And I can see the importance of how that works. I know a ton of people who all know who I am, and I don't know them. And I watch them come in and volunteer or do favors for somebody, either me in my role or someone in the school system. And it really is quite amazing to see that, because even if you can't help, you can say, I know someone who actually can help with that. That's social fabric. Buildings, traffic, and parking don't drive that. They don't create it. The people actually create and maintain social fabric. So one of the messages I want to get across to this group is that when you worry about the character and social fabric of the town, you need to separate that from this notion that somehow the changing physical look of the town is a driver of that. So you can have development changes in town, but it's really only inaction or withdrawal by people, not buildings, by people, that changes or dictates whether there's deterioration in our social fabric. Next slide. So I throw this up here because I want to bring to life what I mean by individuals contributing to social fabric. Think about this town and its social fabric and the contributions that someone like Joe Warren makes, right? This is an iconic guy who's been doing this thing, and not just that, but Uncle Sam and all the other ways he participates in town for almost 50 years, half a century that guy's been doing that. In addition, he's been on Darien Housing Authority. He was a member of the Board of Selectmen. He ran for my job years ago. That guy is an iconic presence in town, and that's what I mean by social fabric. Everybody knows Danny Dolcetti, and his family has been here for well more than a century, and all the activities that he's been involved in and boards that he's served on. And even in this group, I've got 2 people here today. Eric Yosten, where's Eric? Eric chairs the Environmental Protection Commission. He is the moderator for all of our elections. My wife, Sarah, and I went to the swap shop on Saturday and got yelled at for where we were parking by who? Eric Yosten, because he was working at the swap shop, because he stepped up and made sure that he was part of the fabric of this community. That's social fabric. Fred Conzi's here. Fred, I talk to Fred about housing policy all the time. That guy was on planning and zoning for 20 years. He chaired planning and zoning for many years. And he's just been tricked into joining the Darien Housing Authority. He's still going. And I look at that and I think, people participating in government like that, that's what adds really to our social fabric. Plus, these guys are total characters, like all of you actually in this room. Everybody brings their own quirkiness, their sort of look and feel to who they are and how they think about things to the table. That's social fabric. Right? That's what makes this town an interesting place to be. That's what I think drives all of you to be members of this group. Why? Because you get to hang around and talk to these total characters that have these rich, interesting backgrounds who are not at home, they're over here and they're participating in life. That's social fabric. I think that's pretty important. As I say down here, what would Darien be without that? One of the motivating factors for me to live here, and I've lived all over the United States, is this is a unique place. I've never seen social fabric like this. I've not been around a town that has this kind of participation in government. I mean, I look at the sheer work that's done by people to make government work for no money, for nothing, right out of their hides, like those two gentlemen there, blows me away. I've never seen anything like it. I think this town is unique in terms of that contribution to social fabric. So when you think about this, divorce from your mind that somehow buildings and traffic and all these other things have any impact or, frankly, any relevance to our social fabric. Social fabric comes from people, from many of you in this room. Next slide. Now, I don't want to dismiss the fact that when you see buildings changing, it can be a little shocking, especially when you look at Corbin 2 and the sheer scale of what's being built there. But as David, I think, has said before, anybody remember what was on the site of 1020 before it was there? It was a crappy restaurant. There was a vacant lot. And when I called him this weekend, he says, oh, by the way, that lot was contaminated because there'd been a dry cleaners that had been dumping all their perk there. And it was terrible. Okay. And so maybe it was surprising to see all that replaced, but can anybody imagine Darien without 1020 right now? He told me, I think this is right. He told me that's the highest grossing restaurant in Fairfield County. The amount of money that gets spent, I could have retired a long time ago, except for my wife dragging me to 1020. But think about this. Can you? I could have retired except for a lot of things she dragged me to. But anyway, God bless. So, but imagine for a moment Darien without 1020. Imagine for a moment not having the social fabric contribution that having a place like that to go to makes a difference for our social fabric. So, in a sense, we may look at what it was before and we're maybe nervous about what's coming, but we're adding a lot more of this type of thing to Darien. And people are going to want to say, hey, well, we're working on social fabric. I want to go out with my friends. I've now got 10 or 12 of these great places to go to. There's 10, 20 like. Who doesn't want more of that, right? Especially if we can show that this is not something that's ruining other aspects of our life like traffic. My point is that these new residents that are coming into our multifamily housing, or anybody who's electing to stay here, or new families trying to test out Darien, they're not hurting our social fabric. They're adding threads to it, right? And that's really okay because all of us, most of us here are not Darien natives. We came here and we added our own thread to that fabric. And I would argue that it's better. And so the way we're going to keep making that better is by continuing to add to that and protect it and not worry that it's buildings that are causing the problem. Next slide. So what do you do? So there's a number of things that you could think about that I believe create social fabric or at least maintain it. And it's joining something. All of you have done that by joining something like this. This is a tremendous example of social fabric. Where could you go where you would find an intellectually diverse group like this that would allow you to be part of the social fabric of this town? For some of you, this may be your main thing, not just these meetings, but the activities the DMA has. Isn't that fantastic? I mean, what other town has something like this that for folks who are retired and wondering what the heck they could do to stay engaged or stay active or intellectually interested, they can come to something like this. It's fabulous. It really is something. But if you think about what you could do like more of what you've done, which is to join something. Another one, bring somebody with you, right? We all have a chance to meet people, particularly maybe folks who live in some of these apartments or are new to town and don't quite understand how strong this social fabric is. Start to loop them in, start to trick them into coming to one of these things and letting them be part of what we do here. And then sponsor something. You have a dinner or a little something that you've got where you could invite somebody to come over, right? I'm not saying to come in and do all of this, but my challenge to everybody here and anybody who ends up watching this is what is that one extra thing? What is a single thing that you could do over the course of 2026 that would be additive to what you're doing right now? And if you think about that multiplier effect for our social fabric, to the extent that you're worried about preserving it, that's really important. Now, one of the things about this job is that it gives me a unique opportunity to promote our social fabric. Somebody asked me, how much time do you spend? This is about a 60-hour week job. Almost 7 days a week, I'm having to put on something like this. Why? Because there's a thing to go to. And one of the things that I've done in this job is I've just made it my personal rule that I'm going to say yes to everything. So if I get invited to come do something, give a speech, do a fundraiser, a dinner, something, unless I'm physically unavailable or committed to something else, I say yes to everything. And so my day at town hall and in town is supplemented by meetings most night for something that I have to do. Why? It's the social fabric. That's an important thing. So when someone wants the first selectman to show up at a celebration, or this gentleman who had the 100th birthday at the Mather Center the other day, you show up, you have a proclamation, and you celebrate that. Why? That's how you promote social fabric, right? Sometimes it's even on a personal basis. There was a time right after I took office, and I found out through the grapevine that an acquaintance of mine was very sick, maybe terminally sick. And about a month later, I saw him at a restaurant that my wife and I were eating at. And he came up to me and confided in me what was going on and said, I've got all these difficulties, but I'm hopeful there's some experimental treatments. Maybe I'll be, okay. And so I thought about that. And so one of the things you have in this job is you have trappings of office. So you got flags and pins and cards and all the stickers, that type of thing. And one of the things I have is I have this little note card. It's got the town seal on it. It's got my name at the bottom for Selectman. So I said, I think I'm going to write that guy a card. So I got that out. I wrote out a card. It's great to see you. I was encouraged by what you had to say. Don't worry, all your friends are behind you. The town's behind you. You've got this. Put that card in the mail, and I forgot about it. About 2 months later, we happened to be at the same restaurant, and he was there with his wife and some other friends. And his wife came up to me and she said, we've had a really hard time with his diagnosis and treatment, and it's been really, really tough for us. And we had a particularly bad day. And your card came in the mail. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate that. That's social fabric. That's why this type of thing is important. Why I wanted to talk about this with you guys today, because it's about these people. It's about reaching out and touching other people and saying, how can I get them to become part of or to join in the social fabric? Because if you ask each of yourselves, right, what's been among the most important things in your life, right, even in your careers with your families, and even now being a retired person, to say, I've got something that I can go to that creates social fabric for me, that lets me to be a thread in that fabric. Okay, that's actually the most important thing. So as you retreat from this presentation, sorry about the emotion, but as you retreat from this presentation, go home, ask yourself, is this an important thing to me? And what's that maybe one thing that I could do to help not only preserve that social fabric, but to extend that blanket to other people in town, especially these newcomers? Because all the characters that I just talked about are not going to be on the stage doing what they're doing 20 years from now. A lot of us won't be for sure either. I hope I'm not in this job for 20 years. Please vote against me if I'm running in 20 years. In fact, I will pay for campaign signs for some other person, right? But the point is go home and think about what you could do to add an extra thread to that. I think you'll find that it's not only fulfilling for you, but it answers the questions that you have, which is, what about the social fabric in this town? I will close, next slide, with a paraphrase of our 35th president. Ask not what Darien can do to preserve the social fabric. Ask what you can do to preserve the social fabric of Darien. Thank you. Now, is this working? Oh, yeah, so now I think I have to tell a joke. Is that right? Now, Tom, where's Tom? So Tom is there. Well, I'm not sure I'm as gifted as Harry, but Tom, I know, is our comedian extraordinaire back to Charlie Chaplin, a long time. So this guy lives in this town. He's led a righteous and pious life, and he decides though that it's not quite enough. So he goes down and he says, I know what I'll do is I'm going to join the local monastery. So he goes to the monastery, he raps on the door, and the door opens, and there's a monk there at the door. And he said, well, I'd like to join the monastery. Man signals in. They walk down this hall, this huge office with the head monk. Man explains what he wants to do, and the head monk says, well, we'd very much like to have you here. This is terrific. However, we do have a rule. And the rule is you can only speak 2 words every 10 years. Otherwise, total silence. Man nods his hand, goes off to his room. 10 years go by. He's summoned in to see the head monk. Head monk reminds him of this policy. Well, you know, every 10 years you are able to speak 2 words. I wanted to know if you had anything you wanted to say. And the man thought for a minute, rubbed his chin, and he said, bed hard. Head monk nods his head. Man walks away. Another 10 years go by. He's summoned to the head monk's office, reminded of this policy, and asked if he has anything he wants to say. Man scratched his head and he says, food cold. Head monk nods his head. Man leaves. Another 10 years go by. It's been 30 years. Man is once again summoned to the head monk's office and reminded of this policy every 2 years, 10 words, or every 10 years, 2 words. Asked if he has anything to say. Without hesitation, the man puts his hands on his hips and he says, I quit. And the head monk says, well, I'm not surprised. You've done nothing but complain since you got it. Is it? All right, wait a minute. Does this meet the Tom Lom standard? There we go. Okay. I am happy to take your questions. We certainly have time for that.
So John,
Go.
sorry. Well, you talk about the housing and we talk about the retail. What about the office space? I mean, I see a lot of vacant signs around some of the office space, and I know that, Corbin 2 is booked, but how appealing and how much action is going on in terms of drawing new businesses in?
Well, part of the reason, and I don't think I'm talking out of turn on this, part of the reason that Thorndale Circle is being torn down is that you get to the point in commercial real estate that you can no longer renovate something to Class A standards, right? And one of the interesting things that David has done is he's created this new office space. And by the way, it's not hugely additive. Keep in mind, anytime that office space is torn down, it's replacing office space. And instead of just creating brand new square footage. So the net creation of office space is not as high as you'd think. But what's he replacing it with? He's replacing it with Class A office space. Having worked at McKinsey for 16 years, I can assure you they have enough money not to move into anything less than Class A. And yet that was such a great location. McKinsey and companies put their regional office in Darien, Connecticut. And so, and by the way, this creates an interesting symbiosis. And so if you're an owner of 1020 or Antonio's or the Goose or any one of these new restaurants that are coming in Corbin 2, you'll have a dinner crowd who wants a lunch crowd with people who have expense accounts. And so I've been at 1020 and I've seen some of these, vest wearing finance bros coming over and spending a ton of money on lunch at 1020. So the symbiosis that you create by having super nice restaurants like that, combined with Class A office space that attracts people who can spend money in places like Darien, I think is going to be a huge economic benefit for us. And so when you talk about sort of vacancies of office space, the Class A stuff is not going to have any vacancy trouble. The other stuff that is not quite that, that's certainly a fair bit of that in town. And I can see some of that being rehabilitated or actually torn down and replaced with Class A office space. Keep in mind, though, that the best spot for that stuff is going to be near these restaurants and near the town environment like that, because then you've got places to take clients and other folks for lunch. So I love the way he's got that set up. If you see the list of restaurants that he's putting into Corbin 2, we're going to have 4 or 5 more places that are of that caliber, right? And even a place such as the Ocean Prime place that was where the melting pot was. He was telling me this interesting statistic. Did you know that the bar at that restaurant, y'all hear this? The bar at that restaurant, there's 7 or 8 restaurants in the chain, and it's a New Jersey-based chain that owns all that. The bar and the restaurant in Darien is more profitable than the bars of the next 3 restaurants in their chain combined. Okay. So either the town has a drinking problem, or we have an expense account problem. I suspect it's a little bit of both. Next question. Who else? Anybody?
Yes, I have a question. First of all, I have a comment, which is, even before you told the joke, I was thinking to myself, you need to come here weekly and replace both Harry and me, because you're far funnier, certainly far funnier than Harry. I mean,
Well, I've got a few off-color jokes that would make you say, geez, I wish we had Harry back here, but anyway, okay.
Anyway, so my question has to do with aesthetics.
Yes.
I'm sure the P and Z is very conscientious about what the look of the physical additions to town is in terms of the buildings. My question has to do with the aesthetics around those buildings and whether we can accelerate the beautification, if you will. When I look at what's going on in Norotan Heights, okay, the buildings, are acceptable, but, nothing's happened much in terms of making it pretty or making it attractive beyond the building. And when you look at it from the turnpike, you look at this vast space. and
Of
you say,
concrete.
oh my God. Yes, exactly. And so I worry a little bit about what might happen in Corbin. And in general, do we have a group that's, kind of in charge of that, or do we have any say in that? Or,
Yes, great question. So part of the problem is that landscaping is the last thing you do with anything. Now, to your point, the Norotan Heights development, certainly for Darien Commons, where Molto and all that is, that stuff's largely done.
Yeah.
Part of the challenge with that is some of the landscaping needs to mature. As it gets bigger and fills out, that area is going to look better. One of the other things is that a big contributor to landscape is how the track side looks. And the Norotan Heights train station is actually teed up for redevelopment, but not until 2030 is the last that I've heard. So a long time, but here's the good news. It's on the CONDOT's list. So we're going to get that done at some point. And as part of that, they're going to rehabilitate all the landscaping. That's true also, by the way, for the Darien train station. There's a huge landscaping plan. And once that work gets done, the Darien train station is going to look infinitely better than what it looks like today.
our lifetime?
Yes. When it's finished in the 22nd century, I think, then we're going to have that. But the two groups that do that, so there's what's called ARB, which is the Architectural Review Board. When they approve all of that, there is a landscaping plan that they approve that's part of it. So John Vaccaro in the Heights Corner, where the Epi Computers used to be, there's a big landscaping plan that surrounds all of that has to be built as a result of that. Some of it will take time to grow in, but they're mindful of that. For town properties, it's the Beautification Commission. And so all of the hanging plants that you see, a lot of that is what they do to try to add to that aesthetic. Is there more to be done? Absolutely. But you raise a good point. Next.
John,
Who's got the mic?
I had a question regarding schools.
Yes, sir.
With all the extra population, have they addressed the expansion? I see on Mansfield, the Royal School has an expansion. Is there anything else being done for any other schools in town?
When Darien Commons opened, again, that's the Molto's place that replaced the old Stop and Shop that was there. There's 175 apartments that were put into that complex where we had never had multifamily housing before. Does anyone care to guess what the net addition to the student population was coming from that complex? 5. Why? Because they're all 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, right? They're not big enough for anybody to come in with a lot of kids to put into the Darien school system. And so as a result, simply because of the constraint in apartment size, I think right now, Avalon, which is now called Everly, is I think the only place that you can find 3 and more bedroom apartments as a general matter in Darien. And most of the people who live there are either transients or they're people waiting for their house to be built or they're divorced dads, right? So even that is just not contributing much to our school population. And if you look at those population figures, which they presented in the Board of Education budget discussion with the Board of Finance last night, yeah, it's pretty flat. It's slightly lower next year for both Middlesex and the high school, a little bit more for the elementary schools. But even when I was chairman of the Board of Finance, I was still predicting that we were going to have a surge in students. And I've actually been wrong about that. We just haven't had it. And we are actually not at the peak of students that we had, which was about 10 years ago, maybe 150 more than we have today. We're actually off that peak. The renovations that are being completed for Henley Homes and Royal, those are more about sort of 21st century Oxford Elementary type standards, which is to bring those buildings up to code, put in air conditioning, and just make this a little bit more livable. A lot of those buildings are now approaching a century old. And so it was time for that. A lot of the expansions that you see are simply to accommodate larger class sizes or really provide for technology. or to acknowledge the fact that we've evolved beyond libraries being simply book repositories. There's a lot more to that. And so a lot of those changes are what's being included in the HHR process. But to answer your question directly, nothing I've seen leads me to believe that we're going to face a school capacity shortage and have to, God forbid, build another school at Baker Park. I do not see that happening anytime soon, if ever.
Can you give us a little update on Great Island?
It's great. So the RTM passed on Monday an appropriation of about 475,000, I think. The purpose of that appropriation is to hire a consultant to do a few things. One is to finalize the design of the parking that we want to put on Great Island, and two, to create what are called bid documents, construction bid documents. So the next phase in this is we need to have a construction company actually come out and bid that work. In order to do that, they've got to have bid documents to do it. These are pretty complicated documents that specify everything we want and don't want with parking on Great Island. So those consultants are going to get started within the next week. And coming out of that, which we expect sometime late summer, are all the surveys, construction bid documents, all of that. And we would put this work out to bid. The master plan that was created envisions about 50 to 60 permanent parking places and another 40 of sort of what we call overflow parking into some grassy areas. And once all that parking is completed, you'll be able to drive up 23A. That road's going to be finished, call it Memorial Day. You'll be able to drive onto the island and park. So that's going to provide a way for folks who are mobility challenged or people like me that just don't want to walk on Pear Tree Point Road ever again, the most dangerous road on the planet. Anyways, not completely true, but there's no sidewalk there. And so I get how people don't want to walk on that. When I walk, I actually go around and down Long Neck Point Road just because it seems a little better. There's a lot of people who just don't want to do that. So this parking is going to facilitate, but that's the quick update for Great Island. Other things that are going on, but the proximate stuff is to get that parking in place.
Back
Got
to
the microphone.
housing for a moment. You know, we all agree, I think that David Genovese has done a great job for Corbin District. That's different from Darien Commons. We don't hear very much about Thorndale Circle and what's going on there and the number of apartments and how that's going to be constructed. And I'm curious if there's anything else after that on the horizon that's going to continue to change the fabric of the town.
I think I had Thorndale Circle on my slide and I've forgotten exactly what the number is, but call it 165 units. And they had actually proposed well more than 300 in their original design, but it was rejected by planning and zoning as being just too dense. And so we do have standards like that that help mitigate the concentration of multifamily units. I think that's better. That'll all be finished in the next 24 to 36 months. But they are, if you've seen some of the drone shots that I did in my State of the Town address, they have torn out a ton of those buildings and they're making a lot of progress over there. There actually used to be a big facility where they would dump ash from incineration over there, and all that's been taken out. It's kind of interesting when you look back and say, geez, that was the part of character of Darien 50 years ago. I'm not sure I want to repeat that, but they've taken all that out. So it'll be replaced with multifamily housing with affordable based on the inclusionary zoning that we have. And the good thing is that it's right there and it's walkable distance into town. So in terms of what's next, maybe some of those two big office buildings on Tokenique Road, but they're extremely expensive. And only one of them's for sale to my knowledge. That's a possible location, but in terms of other places in town, I don't know where you would put any major housing projects in town. The one potential exception, and it wouldn't be a huge complex, is somebody mentioned before the 8002. So with that transit-oriented development, one of the things you have to keep in mind is except for Leroy West, which is over by off of Leroy for parking for the Darien train station, and now the Coons lot, every last bit of commuter parking that we have in town, in Roten Heights, at Darien, all of it is owned by the Connecticut Department of Transportation. Okay, they are within their right to come in today and say, we'd like to build housing on that property. And there's not a single thing the town of Darien can do about that. So in my judgment, it would be a mistake for us as a town to say, no, we're not going to cooperate with the governor's call to let towns take the lead and help create transit-oriented development. I personally think that's a mistake. One area that we've teed up as a potential place for development is on Mechanic Street. So if you come right there, you turn down Mechanic Street that takes you over to Goodwives, that triangle back there that's behind Heights Pizza, you could see some affordable housing being built there. And what's interesting about that is that it's out of the way, it's transit-oriented development. It could help recatalyze development of that side of the post road. And it would show the town that we're cooperating on that. In fact, that we'll have, of course, been confirmed at the last minute. On April 8th here, I'm going to interview Governor Lamont here. And one of the things that I'm trying to get set up is he and I are going to go tour some of those spots in town and let him see some of that real estate. And then what I want to do is talk about how Darien is creating housing that makes sense for us. And so if we need to figure out a way to cooperate with the state and take that moving target and put it on other towns, but do it in a way that works for us, love the Mechanic Street option. That's just an empty lot that's.
The bank used to be across from Goodwives.
So that bank, that's the old Bank of America building. That was bought by a private developer and they're putting in, I think, 16 units into that spot. But that's just the small little apartment complex right there. That's what's being built there. Who's got the mic next? Alex.
I just have a question. With all this development, commercial development, is the tax burden shifting in any appreciable way away from the old folks toward
Well,
commercial enterprises?
There's this weird new provision. If your last name is Wiggins, there's this tax charge you have to pay. And fortunately, that means my taxes are going down. So appreciate you stepping up. Now, interesting, all the new commercial development, remember, it's a net change. So there was commercial tax being paid for. Now we have new commercial tax. The question is, how much does that change the tax burden? So in Darien, about 10 or 11% of our grand list tax base is commercial. It's a lot lower than you'd think it is. And that's because this historically has been largely a residential community. So it's not like Greenwich that has, 25% of their tax base, or any of these larger towns where they depend on commercial properties to pay taxes. And so even if it increases by 50%, some of these places, in terms of it materially shifting the tax burden from residences to commercial businesses, because they start off so small in terms of a percentage, it's not going to be the big change that you think it would be. It'll help, but it's not going to be a big change. Interestingly, the comptroller has a working group looking at property taxes across the state of Connecticut, and I'm a member of that group. And we had a discussion just last Friday about that topic, because in some towns, one of the problems you have with revaluations is that the pace of change in real estate values between residential and commercial doesn't always go hand in hand. So for example, let's say you have a town where the residential real estate is stable in value, but commercial properties have collapsed because of office vacancies, okay? So what that means is they should be responsible for less taxes, which shifts the burden to residential taxpayers. And in some towns where you've got 30 or 40% of the tax base coming from commercial businesses, that's created a real problem for residences. And so one of the things we're working on right now are some proposals to create a smoothing process that solves that problem. But we have the advantage of a lot of our real estate value being in homes. And for right now, that's a pretty good thing. So we don't have the problem of imbalance between commercial and residential. The only thing we really have to worry about, which is what a real estate valuation does, is it doesn't increase taxes on houses that are valued more. It increased taxes when there's a differential change in value. And I've explained all this before, but and I have a newsletter or a video that actually goes through this. But remember, when you're looking at your tax bill and say, oh, well, my valuation went up 40%, your question is not, did it go up 40%? How much did it go up relative to the aggregate change in the grand list? The grand list went up 40%. Ceteris paribus, you're paying the same taxes you did last year, assuming no change in government spending. And that's what a lot of people don't realize about how the grand list works. So more technical than I wanted to be, but.
John, despite your telling 50-year-old jokes, I do want to say, and I mean this in all sincerity.
They laughed.
They laughed, but it's
This
also
is a compensated endorsement.
But the one I want to say, if there is a better first selectman than you, I've never seen him.
Thank you.
But thank you for the demographics you gave about people that are moving into town, particularly into the apartment. Do you have any demographics about who's leaving? We're always reading in the paper about the high cost of living in Connecticut, increased taxation, et cetera, et cetera. Anything about why people leave Darien in particular? Warm weather, et cetera?
Part of it's warm weather. Most of those folks still have a footprint in Darien, and they've moved for tax reasons. David was telling me he's got some evidence of folks who've rented apartments in the Corbin district and they're paying many, many thousands of dollars a month, and they're there maybe 2 months a year. They just want to have a pied-à-terre to go to see their kids when they're in town. But because of the tax savings they have by moving to Florida, they can afford that. And so the funny thing is that it's not always true that somebody's moved into these apartments and is contributing to either traffic or to economics in town. They're just doing it because they can. And God bless, right? The free country, you can do that. In terms of people moving away, anecdotally, most of the time it's people wanting to move next to grandkids. They've decided to leave town and they want to be part of their children's lives, and they've decided to decamp for those reasons. I've talked to a number of people who've ended up doing that. But I've been surprised by the number of folks who continue to stay here. And that's why the multifamily housing option is so interesting. I've talked to a few people that are actually in this group who've sold their house and actually live in some of that housing. They're thrilled. They love it. I don't have a yard anymore. If I go decide to take a cruise for a month, I can lock it and leave and we're good. So if you think about just the change in living that you can get from housing like that before all you had was a house and a yard that you had to take care of into your 70s and 80s. I'm not even sure I want to do that, but multifamily, an apartment like that, that's a really nice place. Yeah, that gives me an option to stay here. So in a sense, with this multifamily housing, I think you might see the exodus, unless again, they're leaving for family reasons. You might say that could drop off a little bit. We may keep a lot of our seniors in town just because they have that option now that they didn't have before. Who's next? Yes, sir.
Hi, John. Thanks again for joining us.
No charge.
I'm going
Pay
to,
me for it.
I want to take one of your silver linings and add a cloud to it. On the social fabric side, I think the biggest thing that hurt the social fabric of Darien, and you mentioned it, was the death of the newspapers. What is being done? What could be done to fill that hole?
I had lunch with Jim Cameron in January on that very topic. And he and I, you lament this, but the fact is that this has happened all over town. This is not or all over the country. This is not a unique Darien problem. When the Darien Times was bought by Hearst, they evolved all their coverage to non-Darien news stories. And it got so bad that I was picking up the Darien Times and there was not a single article on the front page about Darien. And I canceled my subscription. I have not subscribed personally to the Darien Times in a few years now. And in my capacity, I mean, it's just Johnny Z, but still, I'm the first selectman. I've never been interviewed by the Darien Times, not once. They call it with a couple of questions, but just to sit down and talk to the first selectman of the town that's on their masthead has never happened. Short story is that local media is dead like that. And they simply can't make the economics work. And I understand all this. The question is, what do we replace that with? Well, if you can be a little industrious, there are a lot of places you can go to for news source. And I'll tout Jim Cameron and TV 79. That guy's done a phenomenal job in terms of creating content, not just about town government, about stuff that goes on in town. And if you go to it, and Mike Wheeler's involved in this, there's AI summaries that you can go through and quickly scan sort of what TV coverage is available about different things. And with a little bit of time, you can get very well informed about stuff that's going on in town. And so I'm hopeful that that effort is going to be a proxy for a little bit of local media. The one thing that it doesn't create is adversarial journalism. And by that, I mean having so for example, a hostile reporter ask me a challenging question. Well, Mr. Zagrodzky, what about this? I don't get that a lot. And that's why we created the Ask the First Selectman series. So what Jim does, he collects questions from residents. And if you guys have questions, send them in, right? He'll tell me what the topic is. He will not tell me what the question is. He tapes me live and he does not allow me any editorial comments or editing. And so he'll just take my answer and I go into those discussions cold. And so we've tried to create that where if somebody has a challenging question to put me on the spot, I encourage it, bring it, I'm ready to go. That's the way we're going to have transparency in government and frankly keeps me and anybody else in elective office honest. I want to hear challenging questions. I'm ready for people to come after me because when I hear those questions, it forces me to think, and you know what, maybe there's something I should be doing different. And I'm completely open to that, but I'm not going to get it unless somebody yells at me. So. Challenge 79. So TV 79, just briefly, what the challenge of that, there's an outfit called Nutmeg TV. And what they're responding to is a mandate around community programming. And there's two other channels, it's channel 86, maybe 88, I forget, Mike, you might know, but these other channels that they're purportedly buying Darien TV for. They want to come in and they want to provide region-wide community coverage on all types of things going on in the community, from cooking shows and all that. The fear is that when they bring in the Channel 79 into that mix, that what they're going to do is they're going to do to that what they did to the Darien Times, which is when you turn on TV 79, it's not just a Darien meeting, it's a Westport Board of Finance meeting, it's a Greenwich RTM meeting. And you look at that and you think that's seriously lame. And that's what's going to take out Darien TV if we have that, because even I could barely keep up with the content that we have. There's no chance I'm going to go watch TV 79 if I go sort through and look at all that other stuff from other towns. They've claimed that's not what they're going to do, but they've never explicitly put it in writing, held to account writing that says that's not what we're going to do. And that's why Jim has taken the lead on collecting feedback, including a letter from me to Pura, which is the sort of deciding body, if you will, that says not just no, but hell no, we're not doing that. If it happens, and sometimes bad things happen, the good news is there is the Darien TV website and there's YouTube where you can get just exclusive Darien programming. The reason we want to keep that channel, though, is because that's frequently the destination for folks who want to go watch what's going on in town. They just go to Channel 79 just reflexively, and it would require a fairly big habit change for folks to get away from that. And so we're trying to avoid that. I think we should preserve TV 79 the way it is, and we're fighting the good fight, but we'll see.
John, thank
Yes,
you
sir.
so much for your excellent commercial for Darien. That I've lived here for almost 50 years, and so I agree with you.
You moved here when
It
you were
is-
5? That's amazing.
Yeah, almost 50 years. Yeah. And I never thought I'd ever live anywhere that long. But my question is, it seems to me that our town is just looking to use every square inch of property to build on. And I'm just wondering when the planning and zoning group is going to decide, okay, enough is enough.
So that's a good question. As I said before in my talk, Darien is about 98% developed, given our current zoning setup. There is contemplated legislation in Hartford that would change that. If anybody's looked at this particularly horrifying bill called Senate Bill 151, okay, that bill, in a fit of insanity, right, says that any town with zoning for lots that's more than 5,000 square feet, which is about 1.116 acres, I think, essentially cancels all that zoning and says you can have lot sizes now 5,000 square feet if that property is connected to a sewer. Can you imagine that? So has anybody been to Malibu, California? You know, the houses, they're all kind of like this, and they've got about 6 inches between them. That's what they're thinking. Oh, we'll develop that, and that provides a lot more space for a lot more housing. Guess who supports that? For no points? Developers. They're going to make a ton of money on this in terms of what they can build. And so Darien being 98% developed for the housing zoning that we have, there was a lot more room for development if Hartford comes in and actually takes away the zoning authority that's under local control like I've described. So assuming that does not change, as I said, Darien's 98% developed. So when you look at a lot of that development, it's not development per se, it's redevelopment. It's taking what was there and replacing it with something that's better. And I think that probably is going to continue. In terms of folks being kind of concerned about that, one concern I had was kind of interesting is an affordable house for someone in Darien who's say 38, now a junior MD at some bank, right? Moving to town. Okay, $1.2 million starter cape, right? We buy a house like that, then we'll move up. Every month, we lose multiples of those houses that are torn down and replaced with a $3.7 million, 5,500 square foot house. So in a sense, that, I use this advisedly, affordable housing, say for a new family moving here, that gets harder and harder to find because those houses are being taken out. But here's the question. Let's say you own that cape and you stand to make $1 million more because you could sell it for lot value for the developer who wants to put in that house. And we might say, well, no, I want to preserve this house for somebody who's 35 to move into town. What right do I have to take those economics away from you? None. Right. And that's the ultimate challenge with all this, because you think about yourselves as property owners, do you want a restriction put in place that says when you finally do sell your house to go on to whatever place that reduces your economics so that we can preserve something? Pretty sure the answer is no. And so that's the struggle that you have with all this. And the struggle with Thorndale Circle, you could have said, well, how come those guys just don't rehabilitate those office buildings? They did an economic analysis that said if we tried to do that, we simply can't restore it to standards that would create lease economics that would justify this investment. They looked at it and they concluded that the highest and best use was to put in apartments, and that's why they did what they did. Now, we may not like that, but as a town, do we come in and tell them and that family, no, you have to actually rehabilitate those buildings? And do we take that? These are pretty hard questions to answer. I agree with you in terms of look and feel in town. And we're doing kind of like Tom had described, we've got an ARB and others that are trying to make sure the aesthetics are what we can live with and what we'll like. And as I said before, even the Eiffel Tower, people liked it in time. And the stuff that's being developed will have that same affinity.
Thank you for your service. And I don't have a joke or a complaint or an adversary question, but I want to give you the opportunity to talk about bonding and our town's bond issue, our bond rating, and how much bonding we can actually do before it impacts that.
Our current debt load in the $250 million range is at historic highs. I gave a presentation last night. Our bonding actually is split evenly between schools and the town, a little bit for sewer, but about 52% of our total issuances are for schools. And so this dates back to Tokenique, I think still has got some unpaid bonds there, but we just borrowed more than $100 million to renovate our schools. And we also did another 50 million or so for Ox Ridge by the time we got state rebates. So it's high, and it's driven not just by Great Island, but by schools as well. I've been asked a number of times as whether that affects our credit rating. The thing to keep in mind is that credit ratings, as determined by Moody's, who does our ratings, are the combination of many, many factors. Okay, so part of it is debt levels, but part of it is the fact that, let's be honest, Darien is what, the 9th richest town in the United States. There's no problem with our credit rating. If the credit rating goes down in Darien, there's a much bigger problem globally than something that's going on with Darien. But if you look at fund balance, the size of our grand list, the resilience of our taxpayers, the simple economics in this town, they estimated that even at the debt levels that we have right now, we would have to have well more than twice as much debt before they'd even raise an eyebrow. So in my judgment, and not just my judgment, but in the professionals that I've talked to, there is no threat whatsoever to our credit rating. And by the way, even if there were, the difference between AAA and the next rating down, it's very, very small, and just basis points of interest. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question. First of all, thank you for coming.
Of course.
I'm curious about the relationship between Darien and state, and I want to speak to, I guess, the majority of the motivation based on
like that? How's that working? The motivation based what we've heard from towns is to provide more carrots for them to change behavior. So what
behavior does the state want to change?
The Darien, or is that not an area of focus in your opinion?
Most of the carrot dangling that they do is around housing. And so there are various grants and other ways that the state can cooperate to help you fund housing. So for example, if we worked with the Connecticut Department of Transportation, and to their credit, they've been most gracious throughout this process. They've been very clear throughout that they don't want to impose something that's inconsistent with what the town wants. And they've been straight shooters the entire time, publicly and in private conversations with me. So the carrot is, here's a way the state could cooperate with you, assist with some of the funding of some of this development, and kind of work with you on that. That's a carrot. And I'm okay with carrots. Most of the time, Darien, because of the wealth in this town, we don't typically qualify for government grants on literally anything, because they really are for towns that have less means, and as it should be. So that said, with carrots for something like housing, in that way, if there's a way we could take advantage of that, and they're going to be fairly modest because of who we are, I'm good with that. But that's an example of what they're trying to do. The housing situation in Connecticut is difficult. We're densely packed in areas of significant employment. We've got road problems, we've got train problems, we've got no easy solution to that. And it's going to take a long time, but there's not, even with some of the scariest legislation they're doing, are they going to move the needle significantly on housing, both in terms of supply and cost? No, not in my judgment. David, get that young man a microphone.
95 is a jurisdiction, but
Oh, there you go. David.
go ahead.
I know I-95 isn't your jurisdiction, but we all live here and you showed us a photograph that's a bit scary. And so as you listen to Hartford and listen to the rest of the country talk, what is the long-term solution to that problem?
Well, so it's pretty interesting. So I'm from Texas. That's where I grew up. If any of y'all have spent time down in Texas, one of the things you find is that they've taken this road expansion thing to great lengths. I think there's a highway down there, if I'm not mistaken, that has 9 lanes on either side, these gigantic freeways. By the way, the on-ramps, off-ramps, U-turns under freeways, the design for freeways there is so much better than it is here. It's scandalous, okay? And you go down there, they are packed with traffic. So building new highways is not, unfortunately, the answer. And there's no easy answer here. I got a report the other day that says they're considering taking the emergency lane on I-84, where there's a lot of traffic going up to Hartford. They're going to set that up where that can be a lane of traffic during rush hour and all of that in just a 5 or 6 mile stretch. They think that'll alleviate some traffic. You know how much that was going to cost? $300 million. I thought I was going to have to be defibrillated. That thing, I mean, $300 million for that. It's just evidence that if you wanted to make a significant change in road capacity or anything like that, it's damn near impossible from the regulatory, the time that it takes. Anybody remember the exit reconstruction up at 13, 14, 15 when they did all that? Damn thing took 4 years. Between December 7th, 1941 and VE Day in April 1945, less than 3.5 years, we prosecuted World War II. And they can't redo exits on a highway in less time than that. And I think that's emblematic of the challenge that we face to do that. So, but what's the solution? I think the solution is going to be, and the governor's kind of right about this, if you can create housing near transit hubs where people don't have to get on highways, that's helpful. There's a lot of people who don't like tolls, but that also could be helpful. Let's see how that actually plays out. Down in Texas, they have that where you've got variable toll pricing, and it does force people to say, do I really need to be on the road at the most busy time? And so spreading things out. To be honest, the thing that I think will really change things is technology. In my last newsletter, I talked about senior citizens. And I told the story of my parents living down in Texas. Dad's 86, mother's 85, and dad's worried about driving at night and in the weather. He just won't do it anymore. He got convinced by a neighbor to buy a Tesla just the other day, or last month. So I was down there and I got to ride in this thing. He says, this changes everything. He says, I get in, I say, go. I don't have to do anything, literally nothing. It will take me to where I want to go, and it's a better driver than I ever was. That technology is just getting started. And in about 10 years, you could see that because that technology exists and maybe all these cars are talking to each other, it's going to be a lot easier to manage traffic. You could have a lot less accidents. You could have rides postponed to times when it's less busy because it doesn't matter when you're driving because the car's doing all the driving. So I'm actually hopeful that technology is going to come in and make a material difference in how we even conceptualize traffic. Did you know that I think it's between a quarter and a third of all the cars on the road today in San Francisco, California, have no drivers? Do you read that? Did you read that? That's amazing. That technology is just getting started. And Doug, where's Doug? Doug.
Final question.
Doug bought a Tesla right there. And you know what? I'm gonna follow suit with that. I think it's a fantastic idea. I'd like to get that as my next car.
Final question.
Quick question. Thanks very much. It's really, really helpful. I want to go back to Great Island. Right now, access to Great Island pedestrians is constrained because there's nowhere, if you don't live right next to Great Island, there's nowhere to park.
Yep.
What's going on at Pear Tree? How long is it going to take for us to be able to find a place to park where we can walk the island?
Tom, it's a good question because right now, at the very moment, I don't have a great answer. Okay, there is no parking on Pear Tree Point Beach. That beach, though, is going to be finished with that parking open no later than Memorial Day, based on the forecast. So we will be able to go back to what we had before, which is you can park there and walk either up Pear Tree Point Road or along that point. The other place is if you park up by on the post road that say churches or any of the retail parking that's available that's up there, it's actually a shorter walk, believe it or not, from the post road at Rings End Road than it is from Pear Tree Point. If you measure it, it's slightly shorter. And Rings End Road has got sidewalks up all the way down. So a lot of times, and I live near Town Hall, so I can actually walk all the way to Great Island. It's not a big deal, but that's the way I always go if I walk from home. So
Parking lot is empty. The Catholic Church parking lot at the top of Reeves End Road. You walk there, from Reeves End Road.
so St. John's Church, it's right there. Yeah. Yeah. Let's be, people park on Harbor Road. We're getting a lot. We've had a lot of complaints about that. The problem with Harbor Lane is that it's a public road and, you know, people can park there. The church parking lot, please respect that. That's a privately owned lot. But to your point, it's busy on Sundays. It's not busy at other times. But those are all great options for you to consider. The parking that I mentioned should be ready all of 2027. It's going to take time to do that. And again, the wheels of government take some time to get that to work. So anyway,
Final question.
Yes. Oop, last question? That it? We're done?
John, thank you very much.
I appreciate you all having me. Thank you.